The valley they called Big Muddy wasn't named for the river so much as the color it left on a man. Coal dust crawled into cuffs and cuffs into beds, and by morning the bunkhouses wore a thin gray skin. When the first frost came early that year, the company cut pay a dime a ton and announced the store would take only scrip until conditions improve. Conditions never did. Men shuffled to the heavy counter for flour and lamp oil, while a clerk with a green eye shade measured everything like a judge. Outside, the wind skated across the flats and sang in the telegraph wires, and the black tipple creaked like an old gallows at the edge of town. They had argued in whispers at first, in the driftmouth and around the boarding-house stove, about asking for the dime back and a fair weight at the scales. Everyone knew the scales cheated. You could feel it in your back at night, the difference between what you hoisted and what the tallyman wrote. When the committee finally put it in writing, the superintendent pinned their note to a post and pretended he hadn't seen it. Then he put the town marshal on a higher wage and told the store to stop extending credit to anyone who signed the paper. The notice went around like a contagion. So did anger. The strike started on a Monday, quiet as a prayer. No hooter blew that dawn. The hooter was manned by strikers. Men stood under their lunch pails and did not lift them. The tipple slowed and then idled. The company answered by padlocking the store and bringing in a wagon of jumpers, guards with star badges hammered on in some other county, and by midweek, the foreman's smile said what his mouth didn't. They were already telegraphing for replacements, imported men, strikebreakers. The word sounded like iron cracking. The train came in at dusk 3 days later, a string of cars coughing cinders. The new men peered out, hard cases and hungry ones, some who'd lost their farms to drought, a few boys, one or two with the tense, watchful look of men who had crossed more than one state line in a hurry. There were rumors of others hired from far back east, even from overseas, men who didn't yet know a western winter or the taste of scrip. The jumpers formed a cordon. The superintendent made a small speech from the platform about opportunity and discipline and keeping the road supplied. The strikers said nothing. They watched their jobs roll past them on boots that didn't yet fit the mud. You could feel the valley holding its breath. Wives counted the coal left in scuttles. Children carried water with eyes wide. A tent camp rose in a stand of cottonwoods for those evicted from company rooms, canvas snapping like gunfire when the wind came down from the ridge. The committee tried to keep the line orderly. No liquor by the tipple, no stones, no insults that couldn't be swallowed later. But order grows thin when the store is locked and a baby's cough turns wet. The marshal took to riding the rail spur with a rifle across his saddle, and the editor of the little weekly paper wrote that outside agitators had infected decent men. The next day, the editor's woodpile went missing, a quiet retaliation stacked neatly behind the tent camp. It was the rail spur that set the night moving. No one claimed to have planned it. People later said the wind did the thinking. The imported men had walked the spur in 2s and 3s, guarded by jumpers whose silhouettes were easy to recognize in the lantern glow. That Friday, a whistle blew 3 short blasts from somewhere no whistle should be, and a second later, a headlamp went dark. Another. Then the telegraph wire snapped in 2 places, humming like a struck fiddle string as it fell. The town straightened in its boots. Lamps winked on along the ridge, and the night filled with running feet. Fire moves with a mind of its own. The first flame went up under a cordwood pile stacked too near the spur. The second found a tar barrel beside the tool shed. When heat licked the boards of the loading platform, someone shouted to bring water. Someone else shouted to let it burn. Jumpers fired into the dark and heard only the wind answer. One replacement dropped to his knees and crossed himself. Another tried to kick open the store door, thinking, wrongly, that there'd be safety inside. A woman in a shawl stood between 2 tracks, a bucket hanging from her hand, and screamed the angriest prayer anyone on the line ever heard. No one ever proved who lit which flame. They proved other things. They proved how fast a rumor can run. They shot a boy. They burned the ledger. They're coming for the tents. And how easily a mob's breath becomes a single lung's worth. Men who had sworn to keep the line clean found themselves shouldering into smoke, choking, swinging clubs that felt light because the air was on fire. Replacements scattered like quail. Two jumped the creek and lay belly down in the reeds, while cinders floated past like dead moths. A third was dragged from the platform, his hat crushed flat. He kept shouting a woman's name. It wasn't anyone's name in Big Muddy. By midnight, the platform was charred and the tool shed a red box of nails. The tipple, black against black, still stood. That mattered to the strikers. They'd built it with their backs and wouldn't be the ones to kill it. The marshal collected the jumpers into a knot and argued to fall back, to hold the depot. He was right about that much. A stray bullet is a careless god at a time like that, and more than one found a foolish altar. They carried a wounded breaker to the tent camp, where a miner's wife tore rags and pressed them to the blood. She said nothing. She had seen the superintendent's wife look away from her at church. Morning came with the smell of wet ash and the sound of boots, regular, many, unhurried. Militia rolled in from the county seat, and behind them came a lawyer from the railroad with a telegram from even farther. Orders to reopen at once, to arrest leaders, to break the strike like a horse. The committee men stood with their hats off and listened in a ring, their faces the color of the valley. The lawyer read names from a sheet and touched each with his finger as if counting coins. Those named tried not to swallow too loudly. The law gathered them just the same. Trials in company towns are good theater and poor justice. Witnesses remembered too much or too little. The editor thundered about riot. A preacher tried to preach peace and found his congregation smaller the following Sunday. The verdicts didn't matter as much as the lists that followed. Blacklists sent up and down the rail line. A whisper sent ahead of every man who'd taken a stand. Some drifted to other camps in Colorado or Montana. Some tightened their belts and went back down the same slopes, knowing the lamp oil would come dear and the tally would never match the sweat. A few packed their families into wagons and followed the river east, chasing water and work like migrating geese. Winter eased into the seams of the camp. Children learned to skate on a ditch that had frozen flat. A woman hung laundry and watched a train shiver by, carrying new faces who stared back with the same frightened calculus: food, rent, risk. The store reopened, its door chimes cheerful as a lie, and the clerk measured out flour like pardon. When a man came with a gold watch and a notebook to take statements for the record, he asked for a name, and the woman folded her arms. "My name is what's left," she said, and he wrote it down without understanding a bit of it. The Big Muddy never forgot the night of flames along the spur. Cinders worked their way into sagebrush and winked out months later as little ghosts. The tipple survived and kept creaking. The hooter blew again, and men again rose in the half-dark to follow their lights into the hill. But the valley had learned something the company had hoped it never would, that a town is a living thing, and when you choke it, it learns how to claw at the hand. If you listened on still nights after that winter, you could hear the telegraph wire sing a cracked tune as the wind moved through it, like a warning or a memory. It said that the next time a scale cheated, the weight wouldn't be the only thing to tip. It said that men talk quietly, and then they stop talking. The company ledger for that year shows losses in neat ink and later profits in thicker ink. It does not show the lean weeks when neighbors split a sack of flour, or the moment a little girl pointed at smoke and said it looked like the train was finally breathing. It does not show the way an old miner, one of the named men, decided to stay, and how his son grew up to run cattle on a patch above the workings where the grass was always thinner. It does not show a woman at a graveside, pressing her palm to black earth that stained her skin the color of what fed her family and nearly starved them. They still call it Big Muddy, and on some maps, the name looks small, a smudge in the empty west. But the story sits heavy in the soil, just under the sage and the coal seam, where it can still be found by anyone willing to dig with their hands. The imported men, the locked store, the night when a valley decided it would not be quiet, these are the parts you can carry out in a pocket, to remember what a dime a ton and a crooked scale can cost. The rest stays there, humming in the wind, alive as the wire, waiting for anyone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.